but what I can show is with a certain degree of likelihood that the virus was created. But what was really done on purpose was the injection program of the mRNA. Here, there is no accident anymore. This is happening for real. It was planned. It was done with high speed, with a lot of
Yeah.
regulations. It was done in a dictatorship type of style, eliminating essentially every alternative thought on how we might progress with this problem that has been imposed on us. And most importantly, this the telltale of the engineered part of the virus, that is the furin cleavage site in the spike protein. I don't have to explain that, probably it's well known, I guess. But the spike, the furin cleavage site, which was proposed by a think tank to the DARPA in 2018 by a leaked document, we know that, and it was inserted, and it's a patented, sequence by Moderna. Well, it was in this paper. It was said that the insertion should create a bioweapon, a coronavirus bioweapon.
Welcome back to the program. My guest today is a physician and a molecular geneticist who specializes in immunology. As a top researcher in his field, he has discovered the genetic causes of dozens of different hereditary diseases, including his incredible work on Alzheimer's disease, which has rewarded him with the Hans Prize for Psychiatry by the Rostock University Hospital, one of the top 1,000 institutions worldwide. He is here to discuss his brand new book, The Indoctrinated Brain: How to Successfully Fend Off the Global Attack on Your Mental Freedom. Please welcome Dr. Michael Nehls to the program. Dr. Nehls, how are you today?
I'm fine. Thank you very much for inviting me, Josh.
Good, good. I'm glad to have you on the program. So I want to kind of dive right into it. In your book, you lay out a very compelling argument that there is indeed a global war on the human brain. I do agree with you that certainly there is. All you have to do is look at, cell phone technology and digital heroin, as I've been calling it for many years, as others have as well. But what I wanted to ask you is, what else do you think is leading to this deterioration?
Yeah, as you already mentioned, I was working on Alzheimer's disease for the last 15 years or so, and I published, I think, a crucial paper in 2016. It's called Unified Theory of Alzheimer's Disease. And in this paper, I lay out that actually Alzheimer's is not caused by aging. Aging is just the prerequisite. That means the disease itself is caused by some completely other things, basically a lifestyle that is unnatural. And based on that, it takes a couple of decades usually for the disease to evolve. And that's why people mistakenly think Alzheimer's is caused by age, but it's actually the lifestyle. And Alzheimer's itself, including also depression, are both diseases of a certain organ in our brain, which is called the hippocampus. It's called hippocampus because it has a seahorse-like shape, and it contains our autobiographical memory. So essentially what deteriorates with Alzheimer's, but also with depression, is the autobiographical memory. And to keep it, let's say, sane and intact for a whole life, actually up to the oldest age, it has a certain feature, and that means a feature that is the ability to produce new nerve cells the whole life, even at at a 90-year-old can produce as many nerve cells in the autobiographical memory center in the hippocampus as an 18-year-old. And this production is necessary, as I have shown, that we keep our autobiographical memory intact, that we don't get into depression, and that we don't get into essentially the development of Alzheimer's. We can actually prevent Alzheimer's altogether. This was groundbreaking, but our lifestyle has not changed for the better. It has changed for the worse. Particularly when I realized what was going on in 2020, the measures that have been taken were totally in the wrong direction. So everything that the hippocampus needs to stay healthy which was already bad in 2019. For example, the depression rates in 2019 were the highest ever recorded. The World Health Organization said we have the #1 disease in the world is now depression. And depression is essentially a sign for a blockade of the production of new nerve cells in the hippocampus, because these nerve cells have several functions, and one of it, which is they are the neuronal correlate for curiosity, for psychological resilience, and our ability to think. So if we shut down the production by a totally, let's say, unnatural lifestyle, and it became really unnatural in 2020, then essentially you block all these functionalities. And for me, that was already a clear sign of a war against our mental immune system, because that's what these functionalities are: curiosity, psychological resilience, the ability to think is what makes us humans and is our mental immune system. Because if you compare the normal immune system, it's against microorganisms, but of course, humans are also endangered by macroorganisms, which are pathogenic. And those macroorganisms, we usually fight them by thinking, by relying on our experience and on social contact. And that's all, and all these abilities depend on our functioning of the autobiographical memory center, and that was under attack.
So, in other words, essentially what you're saying is a lot of this has to do with the environmental aspects of what we are, consuming and what we are witnessing. And of course, the brain is, of course, a muscle, and if you don't use it, it dies. It basically goes away, and some of the capabilities of that brain don't work and function as highly as they should. So, what you're essentially saying is that it is indeed the environment. It was the lockdowns. It was the oxygen deprivation through hypoxia by wearing the masks for so long, the isolation, the 6 feet apart, and all of those things. That also led to massive amounts of depression worldwide, not just in children, but in adults as well. So
Exactly.
let me ask you this. In the end of chapter 2 in particular, without giving away, of course, too much of your amazing new book, you talk about, quote, erasing the cultural operating system on our individual hard drives. I thought that was a fascinating part of the book. Explain what you mean by that.
Well, when you look what was going on the last 4 years, I mean, even the decade before, even decades before, we were led by our culture in a way that we live far away from our natural needs. And so that's the reason why in summer 2019, for example, depression was the #1 disease, as I already said. So that was clear, but where are we heading? And if you look at the books that written by the proponents of what was going on in 2020, for example, COVID-19 and the Great Reset by Schwab, but also if you look at documents in our governments, which outline already what the year 2030 should look like, how it will change, and it will not change for the good. What actually is going on is that we are offered, or we are imposed, a new operating system, new social operating system, as I call it in my book, which can abbreviate like the digital operating system DOS, it would be SOS, which means save our souls, by funnily. But the point is that this new operating system, which is not only an operating system by rules and laws and so forth, and by maybe a world government, it's also an operating system that we have to accept as humans, and it's far away from anything that humans wish to live in. So
essentially, if you don't mind me cutting in here, essentially what you're saying is that in order for the globalists to achieve their goal, which I believe is mind control over every world citizen, clearly the Chinese and the People's Liberation Army are currently right now working on different types of new viruses that, of course, can attack the brain and control the brain. So these digital certificates, if you will, that they're putting in the mRNA technology is pretty much the catalyst. It's what's leading to them being able to take over the quote operating system. So essentially, if we don't take these poisonous vaccines, we won't have the downloaded operating system in our brains. Is that what you're kind of saying?
Well, it's actually happening even without such viruses. I mean, the problem is that to keep essentially our memory, which is telling us what was the past, so we can compare the future events. This is what the autobiographical memory is doing. It helps us to evaluate what's going on and compare it with our past. If you look at totalitarian systems in the past, like fascism or communism and others, usually there was a border around these countries, or and you could see at the other side of the fence, so to speak, and see differences. And so it was always important that you control information. But in a world government where all the world has essentially no fence anymore, then the only way you can compare what's going on, not by looking over a border, but looking into your past, in your own personal past. So in order to accept essentially such a new system, the best way to do that is actually to erase the past. And what my book describes is already now this process of erasure is already occurring. So, for example, when you have depression, the hippocampus shrinks. It's a natural cause. The extreme is actually post-traumatic stress syndrome. And we already know that, and from studies even from the Melinda Gates Foundation, founded research, we know that besides post-traumatic stress syndrome, which causes the hippocampus to shrink, your autobiographical memory to lose capacity, it is also sufficient just to to create fear in people, so that you get a pre-traumatic stress syndrome, which is totally identical. So what you have is you have a shrinking hippocampus, which leads to clinically to an increased rate of depression, which we have seen at the end of 2020. The depression rates have tripled in the United States, for example. But we also see an advancement of Alzheimer's. As I mentioned very early on, Alzheimer's is not caused by age, but is caused by a lifestyle that is far away from natural. So if you make it even more unnatural, then you speed up the process. And that's what we're observing here, for example, in Germany. In Germany, we had in 2021, compared to 2018, a 31% increase in the rate of new Alzheimer cases, a 31% increase. And normally the people get Alzheimer's with about 65 years of age. That's where the disease starts to have an incidence rate that is measurable. But now in this new report from 2021, almost one third, a fourth to one third of all the cases are below 65 years.
Wow.
So
now you're saying, as far as the Alzheimer's is concerned, this is environmental. Now, again,
no, it's not only environmental, but it is a combination. Of course, it's the measurements that had been taken, the lockdowns, the isolation of the people, all the fear mongering, everything contributes to an unnatural situation, which lets the hippocampus shrink and blocks the production of new nerve cells, which are required for your mental immune system. But what I've also shown in my book is that the vaccination program
Right. That's what I wanted to get to.
does the same. So even so, once you have essentially created a situation where people were led to get these injections, then the lockdowns were not necessary anymore. The unnatural lifestyle, so to speak, is now taken over by the injection program. Because what I show in my book is that already in 2002, 2003 with SARS-CoV-1, it was shown that the spike protein of coronaviruses, and particularly it was shown for SARS-CoV-1, but it goes for all of them, is activating the innate immune system to produce and to produce what they are called pro-inflammatory cytokines. So cytokines which signal the body that there's an infection. And this signal is enhanced or activated even if there's no virus, but just a spike protein. That's sufficient.
So these experimental vaccines have been exacerbating the rate of Alzheimer's in many people because, again, the technology in them, the digital certificates, affects and attacks the brain essentially.
Yeah, that's published already. It's published data, peer-reviewed published data, that the spike protein enhances essentially all neurodegenerative disease, in particular Alzheimer's, by many, many different measurements, by many different kinds of modes of action. But the most important mode of action is actually the activation of what I call neuroinflammation. And neuroinflammation is caused by immune cells in the brain that respond to the presence of the spike protein and activate the pro-inflammatory cytokines, for example, interleukin-1. And interleukin-1 was shown that if you inject it, for example, into a mouse, you essentially block completely the production of new nerve cells in the hippocampus. So you create a situation where no new nerve cells are produced. Now you have to imagine you need these new nerve cells for creating new memories. So if they are not there, then
you can't create new memories.
Then you can't create memories unless you force the hippocampus to memorize. And the force is usually strong emotions. So if you do a lot of fear mongering with the narratives that you want to introduce into the brain, then you actually manage that they are memorized. But since there are no new nerve cells available, these new narratives that are now becoming memories in your brain are overriding pre-existing memories.
So everything that's happened and continues to happen, and God forbid doesn't happen here very shortly in the future, is all leading to what you're calling the indoctrination of the brain, mainly because the globalists are trying to indoctrinate everyone's thought process through fear mongering, through lockdowns, through vaccines, through masking, and all these other things, where they're changing the molecular structure, if you will, of the person's brain or everybody's brain. That is their goal. That's what globalists want to do, is control us all.
You essentially erase personality. You erase your own personality, your individuality, and replace it by the narrative.
Right, and that's why they wanted everybody masked up, because when you're masked up, you don't have an individual face. You don't have an individual personality anymore. You're just another person in a mask. And again, I think that was part of the psychological gameplay, if you will.
That's a psychological gameplay, but it's also a neuropathological gameplay. It's really changing the brain, and the collateral damage are the people who have now depression and Alzheimer's. But these are only people on the tip of the iceberg. The majority might not have symptoms of depression yet, at least not clinically maybe, and they have not signs of Alzheimer's yet. But what's happening is that their memories are erased and replaced by the narrative. And the narrative consists of fear of a global war, fear of pandemics, fear of climate change, and it's all global problems, and all these global problems which are now part of your new personality, that the only things you remember when you wake up in the morning, because that's when you start to boot your system. Usually when I boot in my system in the morning, when I wake up, I make sure I still am myself. So I start to remember things which I know about myself, and takes only a few seconds, but then I'm awake. But if you realize that when you override pre-existing memories by fear, and the narratives become your new personality, then you wake up in the morning, and the personality is the fear and the narratives, and the only solution that you can see is a global government, and that's what's going to happen. The majority will probably embrace a new system of control and a social life, which might not be social at all anymore, because it's maybe artificial intelligence controlled, and in the social scoring system that is implanted, and there's no privacy, maybe no ownership of anything anymore. Well, such a system will be the solution for these people, because that's all they know. That would be the ideal, of course, but of course it's not hopefully not happening. That's why I wrote the book. I
Yeah.
wrote the book because I sincerely believe that if we know what's going on, we can fight it.
Yeah, I find it fascinating that there's so many books and there's so much experts out there that talk about, the physical issues and ailments that these vaccines have done to people's bodies. Of course, an uptick in advanced cancers and strokes, and of course, myocarditis and
Yeah,
pericarditis, all
modern,
these different
modern
things.
diseases and so
But
forth.
really, it's affecting the psyche. It's affecting the individual, the brain, how you think, how you operate in society, and I think that's a really fascinating look because a lot of people aren't talking and writing about that. In chapter 4, you talk about the 5 steps of preparation of a crime against humanity. Now, clearly, this was indeed the worst crime against humanity, the release of this, biological weapon that, basically changed the entire world, as far as their behavior is concerned. I've asked this to Dr. Naomi Wolf. I've asked this to Dr. Robert Malone. I've asked this to Dr. Corey, Edward Dowd, many others. I've asked this question. Do you think that the people that were responsible for releasing COVID and creating COVID are ever going to be held accountable?
I sincerely hope so, because we have to make sure that everybody understands that there is purpose behind that. Even if I argue in my book, because I can only argue with science. So the science tells me it's the likelihood that this virus has been created and released by accident or not, or on purpose. That's what I don't know. I have no scientific evidence for the purpose or the non-purpose. But what I can show is with a certain degree of likelihood that the virus was created. But what was really done on purpose was the injection program of the mRNA. Here, there is no accident anymore. This is happening for real. It was planned. It was done with high speed, with a lot of
Yep.
regulations. It was done in a dictatorship type of style, eliminating essentially every alternative thought on how we might progress with this problem that has been imposed on us. And most importantly, the telltale of the engineered part of the virus, that is the furin cleavage site in the spike protein. I don't have to explain that, probably it's well known, I guess. But the spike, the furin cleavage site, which was proposed by a think tank to the DARPA in 2018 by a leaked document, we know that. And it was inserted, and it's a patented, sequence by Moderna. Well, it was in this paper, it was said that the insertion should create a bioweapon, a coronavirus bioweapon. What was not said is that by introducing this cleavage site, this spike protein gets cut, and the released S1 subunit can easily now transverse the blood-brain barrier. So it was already known in 2002, 2003 that, and in publications that have been released a few years later, in 2006, 2007, that by activating the brain cells to produce inflammatory cytokines, you stop essentially the production of nerve cells in the hippocampus, and you shut down the mental immune system. So now with the furin cleavage site, you essentially, it doesn't matter where in the body this virus is produced or the mRNA is entering a cell, the spike subunit is entering the brain and causes damage. And it causes long-term damage. And the specific damage to the brain, besides activating autoimmune diseases and everything that you mentioned already, for me, the main purpose has to be the breakdown of the mental immune system, because that's the common denominator of all the things that we have experienced. And this is really damaging because it cuts down the people's ability to think, to be curious, and it reduces their psychological resilience, which makes them even more easy to control by fear.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
the combination of that is really
we've
dramatic.
seen that clearly in the last 3 to 4 years, that people are just, like sheep. They're just lining up to get these shots, trusting governments around the world and not caring what the possible consequences are. Thank God there is at least 2.4 billion of us in the world that are unvaccinated and never took this poison. But it is sad to know that more than 60% of the entire world's population of 8 billion people have been injected with at least one of these experimental COVID shots. Last question that I have for you is this. You've obviously written other books. Many of them have been bestsellers. What have you learned about yourself from writing this book in particular?
Well, I've learned a lot more about the mental immune system than I even dreamed of before. I thought I had a good working knowledge, but by going into the details, it became really clear that what was happening, and everything that I proposed in my papers and my books before became true. I told everybody Alzheimer's is not caused by age; it's caused by a changed lifestyle. The main culprit of Alzheimer's, but also depression, is neuroinflammation. And now seeing it in a global experiment, which confirms everything: the acceleration, the increased rates of depression and Alzheimer's, even the lack of the mental abilities in school children that we can see. The decline of autobiographical memory and what we call system 2 thinking, that means lateral thinking and thinking,
And that's really so sad that the children were victimized as well as everybody else.
It drives me crazy.
It's the next generation.
It drives me crazy, and actually the main reason I wrote the book is to preserve a world worth living for my grandchildren. That was my goal. I didn't write the book for myself, but I know we need a diagnosis of what's really going on. And only if we have a real good diagnosis that shows us what are the causes of the disease, then we can have a therapy that works. And that's what my book is providing. The last chapter shows you what we need to do to overcome this problem. And actually, what I really believe is that at the end of the day, we are stronger as humanity as we were before.
Well, it's a fascinating read. I recommend the book to anybody out there. The guest is Dr. Michael Nehl. The book is The Indoctrinated Brain: How to Successfully Fend Off the Global Attack on Your Mental Freedom. Dr. Nehls, where can folks go to find your awesome new book?
The book is available everywhere. Skyhorse has published it, and you get it worldwide. That's why I've translated my German version into English. And you get it at Amazon, Barnes and Nobles in America, but you can just check out the website by Skyhorse or wherever. You just Google it, you will find it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being on the program. It was a pleasure having you on, and I wish you nothing but the best of luck with the book and everything else.
George, I thank you. Without you, this book would be worthless.
Well, without you making this book and teaching and educating people, I think that you've given a lot to humanity. You may fight each and every day in your own way. I fight each and every day trying to save America and the rest of the world, your grandchildren, my child, many other people's children. So we've got to continue to fight, and that's exactly what we will do. So thank you, and God bless you. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.